sisters, with these few introductory remarks, I welcome you all in Tanzania, your second, if it's not first home. And now, I declare the floor is open for discussion. Thanking you. Asante sana.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for the keynote address, highlighting some of the key issues which we need to address: cybercrime, disaster management, climate change, financing of infrastructure. Those are key issues which we need to address within our region. And especially climate change is high on the agenda, for the rest of the world, because the climate is affecting every country in the world. So thank you, Honorable Minister. Can we give him another round of applause for his keynote address? Now, I would like to invite our colleague from ECA to give us his presentation, highlighting what are the key areas of interest and what we need to do as a region. And the pointer. Yeah, we need the pointer for. What we will do is, after all the presentations, then we are going to open the floor for interventions by our honorable ministers and all the delegates. Over to you, Soter.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been given only 10 minutes for my presentation. So greetings and the other niceties will be delivered after my presentation. We know that intra-African trade is the lowest globally. We are now at 15% compared to what is happening in Northern Africa, which is almost 50%. And in Asia, it is 58%. And in Europe, it is 67%. But the challenges and hitches why Africa cannot trade among and between themselves is because of lack of seamless connectivity. We don't have efficient and seamless connectivity in order to be able to freight goods and services from one country to another. Now, the dismal intra-African trade is actually basically occasioned by very little rail infrastructure. Given the size of Africa, from Cape Town to Cairo, from Djibouti to Dakar, this covers long distances. So services and the goods can only be traversed or freighted along such huge distances by use of rail. We can't possibly be able to do it with, with highways, given the attendant transport cost, the attendant greenhouse emissions, greenhouse gas emission, and so on and so forth. So rail is the transport mode of choice for the future of Africa. But look at the scenario at the moment. We have just 1.5 kilometer of railways per 1,000, per 1,000 square kilometers of railway in Africa. Now compare that with what is happening in the situation in Asia, where we have almost 4.5, kilometers of built railway per 1,000 square kilometers. In Latin America, it's almost 5. In Europe, it is 8.5 kilometers of built and operational railways per 1,000 square kilometers of railway. So we still have a long way to go, but that is not to say it is impossible. We can do it, and you are almost you have almost started doing it. So basically, we need more railways. Railways are essential for sustainable development, and the lack of integrated African rail networks is holding back growth and intercontinental trade, including the African free continental trade area. Road cannot take the strain from increased trucking. We know the lifespan of our road design in Africa, it had not more than 15 years. But a well-built railway track can last a century. So that makes a big difference. Again, cities are getting congested. We have been to Nairobi, even our beautiful Dar es Salaam here, the traffic is congested. The flyover we are now putting up are just stop-gap measures. So we need to introduce, for example, urban trains to be able to freight, passengers and goods within our cities, at a much more affordable cost. Moving passengers and freight onto rail is vital for environmental, social, economic reasons. One train can transport the freight carried by 4 trucks, back to back. So that makes a lot of difference economically and environmentally. The technology is also advancing very fast. We have hybrid, cleaner diesel and hydrogen fuel cell locomotives. Gone are the days where we used to use charcoal, burning charcoal, in order to operate and power our railways. And then we have artificial intelligence, we have supercapacitor trams, we have automatic coupling, we have variable gauge rolling stock, we have GPS, all these things are making railway transport more efficient. But again, they don't come easy, they are very expensive. And our government coffers are getting limited because of, other much more important or equally important, needs over and above railway development. Now, what you see before you is the railway network in the future. The intention is that the Africa Agenda 2023, which will be implemented in 10-year effort. The first 10-year implementation plan, we want to have all the African capital connected by high-speed train. So we have 6 latitudinal and 4 longitudinal railway network. And this has to be delivered in the first and second year, 10-year implementation plan. So you can see the goal for Agenda 2063, and you can see the guiding principle which have guided us in determining which route from west to east and from south to north, which route we need to take. All those are railway corridors, and they run, in most cases where possible, they run in parallel with highway corridors which are existing at the moment. Now, we can't possibly see the public sector delivering all these railway development in Africa. Inevitably, the private sector has to come on board. But we need to bring the private sector on board. We need to create some frameworks, which are, the private sector has enough resources to try and, join forces with the government to deliver railway infrastructure assets as well as railway services or any other infrastructure in Africa. But there is this, adamant, risk aversion by the private sector. So we need to clean our houses. We need to put our houses in order to bring the private sector on board. Now, you can see the current financing models where we depend on the national budget, development aid, and so on and so forth. So these are common. There is nothing new I want to share with you there. We all know about them. Now, new financing models. A railway financial portfolio, it has, the railway tracks, and again, we have rolling stock. So the idea behind my presentation, the essence of my presentation is that the private sector need to team up with the public sector, namely the government, while the government lays down the railway tracks, the rolling stock, the management, the operation of the rolling stock can easily be taken up by the private sector operators without even having to invest heavily. In case they don't have enough resources, they can easily get wet lease and dry lease of rolling stock, to team up with the government, which will have provided the railway running track. So investors can bring in capital either through direct equity investment in operators or finance operators procurement of rolling stock through structured secured debt and leasing. But without sound state guarantees, the private sector is reluctant to finance rolling stock, or the cost of credit is too high. But why? Now, just in a nutshell, we have seen what is happening in the aviation industry. In most countries, we find that government, the public, will provide, the airport, the communication system, the meteorology equipment, and whatever. And airplanes are acquired and operated by the private sector. And the private sector, they don't even have to have to make upfront payment to acquire the planes. There is a leasing argument between airline operators and airline manufacturers. But for this agreement, for the leasing to take place, there has to be a protocol signed by the operators, by the country in which the operator is operating from, and also by the country where the manufacturers of airplane is operating. So it is this mechanism we want to extend to the railway sector, where the railway operators, the rolling stock operators, will have an agreement with rolling stock owners or even the rolling stock manufacturers, and where this leasing can take place. So the private sector operators in a railway in a given country could procure rolling stock from rolling stock manufacturers through leasing. But this can only happen if the private sector operator, as well as the rolling stock manufacturer, we need to have their interest protected. How are these interests protected? There is a railway protocol I'm going to talk about, and this railway protocol has to be signed and ratified by member states. And given the dismal railway development in Africa, actually we intend, and it is so desirable on us, especially the Economic Commission for Africa and the Global Railway Working Group, to see member states in Africa sign and ratify the protocol. They stand to gain more from that protocol than any other part of the world. Well, those are some of the problems of bringing the private sector on board. Those are some of the challenges of trying to attract the private sector investment. But our intention now is to try and bring crowding private sector participation in infrastructure delivery, particularly with railway assets and services. This is the Cape Town Convention. That is where the aircraft protocol started from, and this is where we draw the extension of aircraft protocol to railway protocol that I'm talking about. So the rail protocol applies to all rolling stock. I mean, all trucks, starting from from engine, from passenger cabins, from trams, from you name it. It is covered by the rail protocol. So you can see there we have inter-urban and urban rolling stock to try and resolve, the congestion of traffic in the urban areas. We have specialist boarding and other rail-mounted equipment, metro trains and trams, monorail trains and cable cars, people movers and shuttles at the airport, and so on and so forth. Again, just like an airplane, the leased rolling stock will have unique numbers that will be monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the owners or the lessor will be responsible for maintenance and the upkeeping of the rolling stock. So as a private operator, you only need to use the rolling stock and pay back the tariff agreed between you and the rolling stock owner or manufacturer. Because there is a monitoring system, just like it is happening, with airplane. The protocol is still, will probably be operational next year because we need to have a minimum number of countries that have signed and ratified, the protocol. The situation in Africa, Gabon has already signed and ratified. Kenya has signed, it is waiting ratification. Mozambique has signed, it is waiting ratification. The protocol in South Africa is now with the Chief Justice for consideration and finally being tabled to the Parliament for ratification and signing. And similar initiatives are going on in a number of countries. So we are doing the advocacy and the campaign to see that in Africa we have as many countries as possible that have signed and ratified the protocol so that it comes into effect. Well, those are some of the basic benefits, for Africa. What Africa stands to gain by signing and ratifying the protocol. It removes a significant financial burden from the government. It liberates public and private operators to obtain private sector financing for rolling stock when needed, and no government budgetary constraints, no tied funding. It opens up non-recourse private financing of existing fleet. It is an important part of a PPP, private-public partnership strategy. It's a key driver for modal shift from road to rail. And again, by introducing a common system of rules in contracting state, it provides operators and financiers where rolling stock operates across jurisdictional borders, so directly support efficient free trade of goods within Africa. Again, it's a one system applicable worldwide on all rail assets, real-time tracking of conditions and location of assets domestically and in other jurisdictions. That is, it covers, even, international transit. Again, it supports new technology. It facilitates more efficient asset management and customized maintenance. It assists insurers, manufacturers, port operators, and other stakeholders, and will support regional regulatory cooperation and system. So those are some of the current SADC railway projects that can easily benefit from the railway protocol. So I'm calling upon member states, who are currently, delivering on those railway infrastructure projects, to try and contact us, and we can help them. We can connect them with rolling stock manufacturers. We can connect them and help them with the procurement of rolling stock. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now on the slide, on the conclusion slide. The Rail Protocol to the Cape Town Convention will support African economic integration and high-speed rail network through the provision of a common rules covering cross-border operation of rolling stock. It will, for public and private operators, the protocol opens up a new capital sources and new ways of doing business, operating leading to a larger, more dynamic, efficient, transparent, and competitive industry. As such, it will be a game changer and will help Africa achieve its economic potential. So, ladies and gentlemen, we need to make this tremendous tool a reality for Africa. Government need to ratify the Rare Protocol, no cost except for parliamentary time, because the ratification in most African countries constitutionally are done by parliament. The Railway Working Group that is based in Geneva, Switzerland, and the UN Economic Commission for Africa are ready to work with you in assisting with the drafting of the ratification instrument and declaration. Let Africa lead the way, because Africa stands to gain more from the Rare Protocol than any other continent. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Minister. Thank you, our colleague from ECA, for highlighting those key issues and also opportunities in terms of investment in the rail networks and business. We had given you 10 minutes, but I think you managed to finish your presentation. Some of the key issues which you highlighted include lack of intertrade, lack of rail infrastructure, railways being essential for sustainable development, decongesting our cities, economic business cases for railway transport networks, advanced rail technology. Also, you highlighted the rail network plan for Africa, comprising of high-speed rail networks. Also, the Agenda 2060, the railway corridors in parallel with highway corridors, creating incentives for private sector investment in the rail business, current financing models, and new financing models, comprising of debt, equity, and leasing, where you highlighted that there's no need to buy rail stock, you can lease it. Investment guarantees, extending aviation business models to railway business, rail stock protocol status in Africa, and lastly, the benefits for signing the protocol. Honorable Ministers, this gives me now the opportunity to call upon our next presenter from ADB. Our colleague is going to talk about financing from the ADB side. So we give you a maximum 10 minutes, say. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mumina Wachendo. I'm a Chief Transport Engineer from African Development Bank, based in Nairobi Regional Office. And it's a delight, and we appreciate having been invited here to make a presentation on financing of infrastructure. So, Honorable Minister, we appreciate your invitation, and we thank you for the hospitality. My objective today will be to show you what we have done in financing of infrastructure, what we are doing, and what we can do together. That will be the contents, a quick overview, and financing windows, instruments. I will give you a quick view of the portfolio, transactions, and then ICT infrastructure financing. The mission of African Development Bank is to spur sustainable economic development and social progress in Africa, and we do this by mobilizing financial resources from world financial markets and then directing their investment in Africa. The membership of African Development Bank consists of all members of African countries, and we also have non-regional members. You can see all members of SADC are members of African Development Bank. So this is your bank. We are not strangers, and we are very delighted to be so. The shareholding is 60% African, and the rest is shared among us the world. And the shareholding cuts across South America, North America, Asia, Middle East, and Europe. Our headquarters is in Abidjan. We have recently rearranged the bank so that it has regional hubs, which are so far established in Tunis, Nairobi, and Johannesburg, Pretoria, rather. We have country offices in 42 countries, which means we are covered the whole of Africa, really. We were founded in 1964 by the founding fathers of African nations, and so far we have about $100 billion authorized capital, and we are AAA rated in the world financial markets. Our strategy at this time is what we are calling a 10-year strategy, which started in 2013, ends in 2022, and at the center of it is infrastructure, the main objective being to support this transformation of African economies. In the recent past, the bank has reorganized the strategy to have 5 key focus areas which are intended to accelerate the implementation of the 10-year strategy and which are in line with African Union's 2063 agenda, and they are also almost 100% in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. And they are, energy, agriculture, industrialization, integration, and social sector. And the bank has plans to invest about $90 billion within 2016-2025 period, a lot of it going to power, energy sector, $33 billion, that's our plan. And $25 billion around about to agriculture, and about $17 billion to industrialization, $13 billion to integration, and about $2.5 billion in the social sector. In terms of our structure of financing, we have 2 key financial windows. We have the concessional window, where we provide concessional loans to poorer African countries, usually sovereign loans. And then we have the commercial window, where we provide commercial non-concessional loans to countries that are in the middle income. In that case, we give them sovereign loans, and we also provide private sector with commercial loans, and this private sector, there's no limitation as long as it comes from somewhere in Africa. The African Development Fund and the Nigerian Trust Fund are the ones that provide the concessional funding, and the African Development Bank provides the commercial funding. The key instruments that we use in funding include lending, which is long-term. We also provide guarantees, equity. We also provide risk management products. We provide trade finance. We also provide grants for technical assistance, which are used to do upstream activities and capacity building. In this case, we also have affiliated partners, Africa 50 Fund, African Guarantee Fund, and African Export-Import Bank. Just a quick show of what we provide. When it comes, especially the private sector, we can provide senior debt, which runs up to 20-year period. We can provide subordinated debt. Equity can be provided directly or indirectly with limitations of 25% if it is direct. Yeah, those are some of the details. At the present, we have an active portfolio of about $56 billion covering most of the key sectors. The sector that the bank has invested most is in transport, which is about 24%, followed by energy at 21%, and finance. In terms of region, we are invested in all regions of Africa. The RDGC, C stands for Central, E stands for Eastern region, Northern region, Southern region. You can see the red one is the Southern region. It has the highest investment. And in terms of SADC, I think all countries of SADC are covered under South except Tanzania. Tanzania in the bank is covered under East Africa. So if we were to move the Tanzanians from the East African bar, then you would find that SADC has the largest investment from the bank. Some of the key projects that we have invested in include airlines. We have funded purchase of jets for Ethiopian Airlines, Cote d'Ivoire. We have also funded ports Dakar Port, Lome Container Depot. We have funded toll roads and bridges. Dakar Highway, we have funded that bridge in Cote d'Ivoire. We have funded sections of the north-south, that is Cape Town to Cairo Road. In fact, we have estimated that within a period of 10 years, the bank invested about $4 billion on sections, at least in 6 countries, many of them in Southern Africa, to close a gap so that you can be able to drive from Cape Town to Cairo. We have funded airports as well. We have funded Ghana Airport. We have also funded energy projects. This is one of the large ones, Medupi Power Station in South Africa. We have funded wind power in Kenya. I think that's the largest wind power in Africa. We have funded hydro power station in Uganda. These are just examples. In South Africa, we also funded transport operations, including Transnet and South African taxi business. We have also funded the Nakala Rail, quite a big chunk of money there. We have also funded Transnet Capital Investment Program. They have a big 7-year investment program, and it's a continuing thing. We did syndication there and put about $250 million. We have also funded the phase 2 of the Dar es Salaam BRT system, which is ongoing. I actually also came to supervise that project. We have funded financing vehicles as well. One of them, just one of them, is Africa Infrastructure Investment Fund. This is just one of them. We have funded many. We have also funded sustainable cities, especially this Eco Atlantic in Nigeria. We have funded industry, Kalangadi Manganese project in South Africa with $150 million. We have funded, in terms of ICT, the EC, East African Submarine Cable System, which was a private-led submarine system in terms of connectivity, which is of your interest today. We have funded also the OB3 satellite system, which is satellites, to extend the telecoms coverage in Africa. We have also financed investment vehicles that are used to build capacity in ICT. One of them is Telecom Tide, Technology and Innovation for Developing Economies. We have put money there, which they can then, distribute it to others. In Boost Africa is also another fund where we have invested. It's also investing in tech, IT industry. We also have invested in digital entrepreneurship using the Youth Entrepreneurship Innovation Fund, which is housed in the bank, and is currently has about $45 million available for borrowing or grant. We have also funded the Carnegie Mellon ICT Center in Rwanda. We funded e-government in Lesotho to do infrastructure in order to modernize and secure the broadband infrastructure. When it comes to ICT, our focus areas include connectivity infrastructure. So we want to finance cables, towers, satellites, etc., in order to increase connectivity. That is, do the infrastructure. That will also include satellites. We also want to finance digital and data services through direct financing, venture capital funds, where we put money in venture capitals who now are specialists in the area, and they can forward the funds to those who need it. We also provide lines of credit for digital technology adoption. At the same time, we want to fund and promote digital entrepreneurs. We also want to really fund digital government, finance government digital adoption, providing infrastructure and services in order to, and also to have systems that will lead to cashless government. At the same time, we also want and are supporting Traverse enablers, the systems that will support infrastructure and the development of digitalization in Africa through hubs. So we promote hubs and fund them, and such as clusters. At the same time, we want to support governments in formulation of policy and regulation and preparation of frameworks that enable ICT to thrive in their countries. We also want to do civil registration and e-identification. We really are very keen to make sure that we have funds available for data protection and regulation, and to be able to also support regulation on transaction, financial transactions in the country using the digital platforms. So financing of infrastructure, we have some details there. The bank is keen to provide private sector financing and also to provide support to the government and to work with other MDBs so that we can provide these services in a broad way. So thank you very much for your attention. We are available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, and thank you, our colleague from ADB, Wakiendo, for highlighting us in terms of the financing opportunities from our bank. And a lot is being done by ADB in terms of financing for various projects on infrastructure. Lastly, the last presentation is going to come from our colleague from DBSA, Loiso, Gia. So we also give you 10 minutes as well before we open up for our honored ministers to make interventions. Thank you, Loiso.
Honorable Minister, honorable ministers from SADC in the ICT space, SADC Secretariat, Diplomatic Corps, and distinguished guests. It gives me a great pleasure to have this opportunity to present in terms of what the Development Bank of Southern Africa is about. I think I will do 7 minutes so that we can catch up time. In essence, the Development Bank was established in 1983, so it's been around for 36 years, and it's 100% owned by the South African government. And in terms of assets, it's very small compared to the African Development Bank at $7.5 billion. Having said that, we like to punch above our weight, especially in the region. And also, because of the nature of infrastructure, this funding is typically done in a partnership manner where you have development finance institutions and you also have the private sector coming in. Where the development finance institutions complement the private sector is in terms of tenure extension, whereby we can go up to 20 years. We are fortunate in terms of our credit rating, both from an international and local perspective. Really, our mission is to help create an enabling environment in terms of infrastructure where the developmental impact is a strong measure for us to be able to achieve that. And in terms of, so we are an infrastructure bank. These are the sectors that we're involved in, being transport, energy, ICT, water, sanitation, and education. From a perspective of how we are structured, we are structured both from an industry expert perspective and also from a regional perspective. So we have dedicated people within the SADC environment. So typically it will be a two-pronged approach, sector expertise and also country expertise. What we've done as a development finance institution is to align ourselves with, from a global, regional, and a local perspective. So we are really here to serve and assist. Our approach in terms of services that we provide, really it's about not just providing funding, it's also to help capacitate institutions that need that capacity building. As a result, what we found is that we have, we manage quite a few funds in terms of project preparation that assists to build capacity in different institutions. I think this is quite an interesting slide because it talks to the different funding mechanisms in terms of capacity building. We have our own internal one, whereby if a project shows merit, we're able to co-finance the bankable feasibility stage. We co-finance that. We typically work with our sister DFIs in terms of that aspect. We have some even specific SADC funds that we're managing in terms of European DFIs, where we help to build capacity, where we help to do the feasibility studies to ensure that projects are bankable or not. Also, quite interestingly enough, we've been accredited by the Global Climate Facility and also the Global Energy Fund, whereby through these we have concessionary funding that we can provide to opportunities, infrastructure opportunities. So in that way, for example, we're able to blend the cost of funding so that it's concessionary, so that it's affordable, and to provide the necessary developmental impact that is required. These are just some of the typical products that we provide, no different to the ADB. So your credit enhancement, as I mentioned earlier, and we can do, we fund both the private sector and the public sector. So we can fund state-owned entities, we can fund sovereigns in terms of their infrastructure rollout. Through our credit rating, we're able to get fairly concessionary lines of credit, both in the local South African market and also globally. This then enables us to be able to extend the tenor of our loans. Just to give you a sense, we've also managed to disperse quite a bit of money. For example, in the last year, we had approvals of $1.1 billion, and that was 72 projects. You'll notice that we have a bias currently in our portfolio towards energy transactions. And if one looks at, in terms of funds deployed in South Africa versus the rest of the continent, there's quite a big difference, but that's part of the reason why we're here. We are open for business, for partnerships with the rest of the continent in terms of being a funding partner. In terms of our pipeline, these are the projects that sectors where we've seen a lot of appetite, where we have actually interacted with different sovereigns and their state-owned entities. As you can see, energy is by far the biggest in terms of opportunity, followed by transport infrastructure. So that's your railways, that's your ports, your airports, your roads. And these projects are at different stages of development in terms of trying to get to bankable feasibility and financial close. You will notice that ICT is lagging behind in SADC. So that needs to change, because the connectivity backbone is what is critical that will assist the region to grow exponentially. The challenge, obviously, is the cost of this type of infrastructure rollout. Fortunately, at the pace at which technology is advancing, there are new technologies like low Earth orbit satellites that are being launched currently, and these may assist in terms of saving the capital expenditure different countries need to invest in. For example, there's one particular company that we are looking to co-finance. Rwanda is already a shareholder. It's a company called OneWeb, and their aspiration is to have world coverage of connectivity by 2021. So in that kind of scenario, you'll find that countries now don't have to worry much about the backbone connectivity. Now it's more about the last mile, and also being able to embark on their fourth industrial revolution strategies. So in conclusion, as the Development Bank of Southern Africa, I'd like to confirm that we are open for business and for partnerships. Thank you.
Okay. South Africa, you are welcome.
Your Excellency, thank you for the opportunity and allow me to greet colleagues, all of them here, and welcome the presentations that have been made. I just have a few comments on the presentations that have been done, mainly by the first presenter on ECA. As I went through the presentation, I think it's important that also we try to integrate planning by all our key sectors in order to make sure that we reduce the cost of deployment of the infrastructures. I am looking at the presentations and looking at the work that we're here to engage on, and my other sense tells me that I think it would have made more sense to add, or probably in the future, to add the ministers responsible for energy, as we talk about the speed, as we talk about the technology introduction to railway and everything communications, to say, will the energy capacity of our countries be able to carry those technologies and those railway stations that we're talking about, including the bullet trains that we want to roll out. But of course, looking at the cost implications, because if we're able to deploy once, if we plan together, then we're able to say, how do you shy away from other unnecessary costs that we would have avoided if we planned together? Of course, talking to the role of digital technologies also to optimize other key sectors. What is it that we need to do to make sure that we really look into that, to enhance? If you're going to talk about the rollout of smart cities, for example, what's the role of the digital technologies in rolling out smart water, smart energy, smart everything that we're talking about? So the deployment of those digital technologies is something that we really need to look into. And of course, in the presentation, there's a mention of state guarantees as enablers of unlocking some potential, be it on funding and other areas. And my observation and the reality, especially with us, the African countries, actually worldwide, is the fact that the fiscal is concentrated, and therefore it can't add more burden to itself. And therefore, what is it that we intend to do in terms of other options that must be introduced to say, yes, we want to go for private-public partnerships, yes, we want investors to come, but what else does the state need to do in order to make sure that investment is realized without looking into state guarantees? Because it's a minimal way of looking into it. And as I move to the next presentation that was done by the African Development Bank, I see one of the key enablers is the point where they are making reference to the support on government, on key issues, which is the policy and regulatory framework. Probably if I were to get, what kind of support do we think the bank can give? I'm asking these honorable members because I'm skeptical as a policymaker to have a financer having to assist government on developing a policy. And of course, I come from an environment whereby we're very cautious of capture and all those things, because who pays the pipe is the one that gets to dictate. And therefore, how do we make sure that probably what we can do is to say we can work on capacitation of those that are developing policies instead of saying we'll assist governments to do that. I feel that's a responsibility that should not be mixed up. Of course, policies are not made for governments, they're made for the entire industry in the countries. But to have a bank that will play a crucial role on regulation, and that, it's really unsettling for me. I just wanted to talk to this, and I'll come back if I have another opportunity. Once more, thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Madam, from South Africa, for your very nice contribution. Any comment from other country? The neighbor Lesotho, the neighbor of South Africa.
Thank you, Chair, and also want to comment on the presentations, well defined and very clear. We have a challenge as SADC, and I'd like to maybe to mention it from Lesotho. Yeah, my mic is on. Okay, thank you, Chair. My intervention is really based on fact that we need to really find a way how we can be able to address the issue of creation of jobs. If we're talking about the high-speed train, we need also to really point a position where we take a position as Africa or other countries about where is this train going to be manufactured? Is it going to be manufactured in Germany or where? When we have countries that can maybe host the issue of manufacturing as to address the issue of job creation. We have resources in terms of steel or in terms of the technology that we have. Can we bring our people together and say, here's a master plan? Then we'll be able to take it to our leaders to say, now we are ready as government, as other countries, we're going to deal with issues of job creation. The second issue that I would like us also to consider on the presentation is the issue of gender. I see that even the statistics, they also guide us to consider this issue of gender parity in ICT, in energy, in infrastructure. And we need to also not to forget it as we go forward. I just want to highlight that. Lastly, just to join South Africa's position in terms of giving information or inviting other stakeholders. Minister of Finances from SADC, we need to have a roundtable discussions with them so that they can also be in support when we go forward. So if we work in silos, sometimes it will delay the time frames. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lesotho. Okay, I can see a hand there. Please mention your name and from which country you are representing to that.
Good morning, thank you, Chair. My name is Mesila. I am a South African, but most importantly, I'm an African. At the recent 4th annual SADC Industrialization Week held here in Dar, there were declarations that were done, and it reads as follows. The forum declared the following areas that require attention and action from the member states. In particular, one that I'm interested in is that the resolution for finance for infrastructure and industrialization, one, to stimulate the private sector in the SADC region to embrace financing of infrastructure and development. And I would assume that we'll speak to the UNECA in terms of having the rail protocol to the Cape Town Convention ratified by member states, particularly on the SADC region. To reduce the risk in infrastructure development, to attract the private sector to invest in this sector, being perhaps the rail sector or the energy sector. In my sector, which is rail, it will also address the protocol that will reduce government risk in terms of financing of the rail rolling stock. At the 52nd Conference of African Finance Ministers, that's what was held in 2019 in Morocco, the meeting resolved that UNECA will be responsible to educate member states on the benefits of the rail protocol to the Cape Town Convention. I would assume that your presence here would be in complying with that resolution. And also in perhaps answering the comment by Lesotho, at the African Union 24th Ordinary Session held in January of 2015, it was resolved that South Africa will champion the manufacture of rolling stock for the continent. And I think it's about time that some of the resolutions that have been made are bring into action And as private sector, we have the view that we need to work together with governments to bring about change. And most importantly, when one manufactures on the continent, it's most likely to answer the question of employment and reducing unemployment that we see in our countries. We believe that in the introduction or perhaps the ratification of the rail protocol will bring about change, will bring about delivery of integrating the continent. It will answer to the AU 2063 agenda. It will also talk to the African Development Bank High Five priorities, which mean integrating the continent. To realize the CFTA, perhaps in small chunks, it will come from the SADC region. If we can get it right on the region, it will be easier to roll it out on the rest of the continent. So my plea perhaps to UNECA is to, on the practical side, what do you expect this meeting to resolve? Would your expectation be in line with the recent fourth annual SADC Industrialization Week resolution to add on it, or you are proposing something else? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I have seen Mozambique, please.
Muito obrigado, Excelência, pela oportunidade da palavra que nos dão para poder fazer algo. Mais uma vez, muito obrigado, Excelência, pela oportunidade da palavra que nos dão para fazermos alguns comentários em relação às apresentações feitas. Congratulá-los, primeiro, pela boa explanação e ir direto às questões que e infraestruturas. Na apresentação feita pela ECA, gostaria de trazer alguma abordagem sobre a planificação feita. É sabido que a questão de transporte passageiro ferroviário em muitos países é subsidiado em cerca de 85%. E se nós colocamos que queremos fazer as ligações ferroviárias entre cidades, me parece que de imediato estamos a dizer que é mais para o transporte de passageiros. Por que nós colocamos logo interligação entre cidades e não trazer uma planificação integrada, como já foi dito, usando a planificação que tem o GIS como base para poder verificar o potencial de cada região e verificar como podemos trazer o conceito dos corredores de desenvolvimento, onde o fator transportado viabiliza o transporte. E não olhar apenas para que o privado esteja no equipamento rolante e deixar a infraestrutura em si a cargo dos Estados-membros. Olhando para os países que nós temos várias áreas onde colocando infraestruturas ferroviárias seria um investimento maior, que acredito que seria de facto de difícil acesso para muitos. O Banco Africano já tinha dito que financiou, por exemplo, o corredor de Nacala. Foi neste conceito de o fator transportado viabilizar o transporte, onde o setor privado financiou inclusive a infraestrutura de base e o equipamento rolante para o fator transportado viabilizar o transporte. E o passageiro, ele vem como um add value, porque não podemos ter infraestruturas ferroviárias onde não temos o passageiro transportado nessa mesma infraestrutura. Tanto queria me associar aos outros de que devíamos trazer isto de forma integrada e que os bancos podiam aumentar a fasquia da área de preparação dos projetos, porque penso que a maior dificuldade está no empacotamento dos projetos, para poder entregar ao setor privado para que este possa avançar como um project finance na questão da infraestrutura em si e não deixar toda a infraestrutura para o Estado. Esta era a nossa contribuição, olhando para que o volume de preparação dos projetos cerca de 10% do valor global do investimento. Entanto, acredito que se os bancos pudessem contribuir nesta questão de preparação melhor dos projetos, seria também importante. Obrigado.
Very nice contribution, but I urge my colleague, fellow ministers, the discussion of infrastructure financing maybe should go together with industrialization, because investing in railway is a huge investment. When you are investing also, you should think which cargo you are going to carry. This is very important, so that you can realize your investment quickly. Okay, another member, Namibia.
Thank you very much, Excellency, Honorable Chairperson of this very, very important session. I wanted to join my colleagues from South Africa and Lesotho in amplifying on one or two issues. One is that if we want to make headway as a sub-region, and of course by extension as Africa, time has come, Honorable Chair, that we address the imperative of ensuring that outcomes from several engagements that we have all over the continent, all over the globe, as various sectors, whether it's ICT, transport, finance, these outcomes are harmonized and synthesized so that we can have comprehensive outcomes, particularly on key developmental issues. Because what is happening is that our colleagues, ministers of finance, they engage on their own, but the other critical sectors are not involved. For example, we also have colleagues who are dealing with planning, who should coordinate the different large-scale projects that we undertake in our respective countries. So there's a greater need for us to really sit down finally and bring all these emerging outcomes together in a comprehensive document that will give us better direction and better traction in terms of implementation. The second issue truly is that as governments, we have run out of space in terms of taking debt on board. In actual fact, some of us are almost choking. And the young generation is not impressed that we seem to be taking debt on board on their behalf, as future leaders. So indeed, as governments, we have run out of the much needed fiscal space. So what we need to maximize as governments is to bring the private sector on board. We need to create that appetite on the part of the private sector for them to come to the party and invest in some of these major infrastructural development. And I'm sure we can succeed in doing that by clearly indicating to the private sector, because these are people who are keen to invest. But, when they invest, at the end of the day, they want to be guaranteed of the returns, on their investment. So we need to work on efforts to bring, the private sector, on board. The one last thing, that I wanted to raise, and this is an issue that speaks to all of us, as governments, is that we need, for a lack of a better word, to reduce the gestation period between conception and delivery, in terms of projects. For too long, we are stuck in the planning phases, but yet, time is of essence. So we need to find ways of saying, this is what we are planning in a harmonized, manner, as nations, as a region, as a continent. But once we have conceived, I think we need to reduce the current, delays in terms of implementation. Because no nations can be and will ever be built on good intentions. It's the deliverables that matters. The longer we take in terms of planning, the greater the likelihood that we are further disadvantaging our region, our continent, and ourselves as members of the global community. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Namibia. I can see now Zimbabwe. You are welcome.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the presenters for wonderful presentations, and I would like to request if we can have those presentations. That would help us a lot. Just to say a little bit about the first presenter who talked on the low intertrade, especially the intra-Africa trade. We noted that the rate, which is very low at 15% as compared to the other continents, is due to the lack of essential railway, which is actually holding development and networking. But I would like to interrogate more to say we see ourselves as African countries, or as Southern African countries, dealing a lot with other countries in Asia. What is the explanation without that railway infrastructure? How would we explain that? And I would like to support what my colleague have said from Namibia, that it is, as African countries, we are already choked with debts. And I think it is very critical that as government, we need to create that environment where private sector investment can actually take over. Otherwise, I'm very grateful to be part of this meeting, and we will learn a lot, and we'll certainly take a lot back home. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. I don't know how many minutes is assigned for the discussion.
Yes, Honorable Minister, when ministers are speaking, we don't give time because they are our stakeholders. So I think this dialogue is very important, and it's an opportunity for the minister to share with us their visions, what we need to do as a region. So, Mr. Chairman, I think my colleague is at the back. I think let's exhaust all the opportunities for discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And we are actually receiving the very, very nice contribution on this item. Okay, more comment, more contribution before we allow the presenters now to respond. Oh, South Africa, more comments. You make sure it should be new one which we have has not been commented by other people.
Yes, Chair, thank you. The financing houses that we on the panel, I just want to find out that with the over 60% of ownership by African from the AFDB and 100% ownership by South African government from DBSA, is there a policy that would perhaps encourage how the money will be spent, in particular, say for instance that if we have project A and a certain percentage of that project must be of African content. Whilst we have a number of projects that are coming up, but we need to start increasing the African content on African projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This time you are very brief. I congratulate you. Okay? Maybe we should now get time now to get a response from the presenters.
Yes. Thank you, Honorable Minister. For the colleagues to respond, we're going to start with ADB. There was a contribution on the support from the bank on regulatory policies and issues. So our colleague from ADB, over to you.
Thank you, sir. The question was if the bank supports policy and regulation in country A, shall the bank therefore impose its own policies, which I suppose might be interpreted to be against the interests of the country? And I say no, because number one, African Development Bank is owned by African governments. So you are the owner of African governments. There's no way, therefore, that the bank can do what you don't want, because you are the ones who tells us what to do. So that's number one. Number two, African Development Bank in its practice is very much Africa-oriented, Africa-centric, and what we do is what is in the interest of Africa. Furthermore, Honorable Minister, there are countries that actually require this, and there was one commenter who already requested that the banks would put more money in the same area, which is upstream, meaning project preparation, policy and regulation. As you can hear, there's no settlement whether, for example, to put more money on state money on rail development, or to put private sector money, or what combinations to do. How to answer that question, one would need to do a study, look at all issues, bring experiences from everywhere, and that's where the banks come in with simple grant money, and we help countries, those who need it, not everybody, those who need it, to build policies. And I can give you examples where we have, for example, built from scratch the PPP regulation systems, policies, even staffing. For about 4 or 5 years, we are funding, using grant funds, a country A to build its own PPP, because if there's no policy, then the private sector cannot easily enter. So sometimes the policy and the environment is not good for private sector. You want the private sector. So we come in here to help. So really, the bank is a servant of the people, and we do what is in the best interest of the people. So I can assure you of that. 60% ownership. The question again from South Africa, do we have African content on the projects that are in Africa? All our projects are in Africa. The procurement, which is what you're asking, basically is international. Sometimes, and most of the time, because capacity is lacking in Africa, especially when it comes to construction and provision of certain goods and services even. So number one is to build that capacity so that the African content increases. But again, the procurement laws, rules of the bank respond to the laws of a country. So there are countries that have put a regulation which says that every project must have a certain percentage of its money spent on local enterprises of certain nature. So if the laws of the country say so, the bank rules and procedure adapt and do that. So again, the ball is a lot more on the country in order to promote. But in our procurement system, there is a deliberate effort and rules and procedures put in place to promote African enterprise. But I can tell you from practice, there's always not much response, especially when it comes to huge infrastructure projects. Whenever it is goods provision, generators and high technology goods, and construction of even simple roads, we still are finding that a lot of responses are coming from outside of Africa, which I think it's regrettable. We wish there was more capacity in terms of tendering and bidding by African enterprises to respond. I think those are the two issues which I clearly remember from your question. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ADB. Here in the presentation, there have been a proposal. Of course, the money is ours, but you are also our advisor. A question from the chair. There is a proposal of PPP, the government to put railway infrastructure and the private sector to buy a rolling stock. If that will be proposed and recommended and our head of state accept, IDB, will you assist financing on the government to build the railway and also on private sector so that they can operate the rolling stock?
Shall I?
Okay. South Africa?
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, and of course, thank you to the bank for providing that informative background and the explanation of who owns the bank. And I just want to clarify one thing before I get into the PPP issue on the fact that I was mentioning the fact that the bank cannot be seen that. Of course, understanding very well that this is an African development bank, it's ours, but it is run by a board and there's elements of independence, which is what we have not seen in most cases as we try to drive the digital, as we try to drive the developmental side of the development that we're talking about in our areas. Hence, I was cautioning on that. We remain the policymakers, that we expect the boards to adhere to it. That's the point I was trying to drive. Not that there may be potential of a confusion in terms of who does what. But if we set up structures, including development banks, and there's requirements that they must meet, and at times those requirements are the ones that prohibit the banks from being able to drive the development agenda that governments want to drive, and we still have to respect each other's role. So that's the emphasis that I was making. And also, if we were to plead, as you correctly put it, that this is, as the African governments, we own the bank, there's a need for alignment of funding from the bank side in relation to the priorities that we are putting as governments. To say, in SADC, in Africa, this is what we want to prioritize in terms of infrastructure. Therefore, which are the key priorities for that financial year or the next financial years? And therefore, the bank must be looking into that so that we know that the bank does not have its own priorities, although the bank does assist us in capacity building, as you put it, conducting studies, helping us on research and all that. But there's a need for alignment with not just country objectives, but also continental objectives, if we are to really derive value on the ASF and the ACFTA that we're talking about, but also leveraging on the fact that we're talking about a 1.3 billion market, which is why I wanted to agree with my colleague to say, as we talk about introduction of these technologies, at what stage do we say the banks must look into funding manufacturing of the components here locally? So that's why I'm talking to alignment in terms of funding and with the alignment with the plans and the agenda that we want to drive as government. And of course, we fully support the idea of the triple Ps. I did make mention of the fact that now we really are constrained as governments, and unfortunately it's not just Africa, but all throughout the world, governments are constrained. Therefore, to say we're calling for investors to come and partner with us, at some point I was making some proposals to my team that probably governments need not be funding infrastructure if it will not have negative implications, but fund the actual service that takes from the infrastructure to home. For example, if I'm talking about rollout of broadband, that will ease the way of doing business and communication throughout the world. Why don't private sector come and put infrastructure, and then as government we say, we're going to fund you for the actual connectivity, taking it from home to the point of presence, looking into those and therefore the alignment. So that's the reason I support the triple Ps, but of course working within the frameworks that we would have agreed on. Thank you once more.
Thank you so much, Mama, for the additional comments, please.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Minister. Lastly, there were questions for ECA on job creation. And gender issues, when to be considered in terms of the projects when they are implemented, and also the issue of trade, intertrade being very low in Africa, but very high, I think, trade with Asia, and also the issue of policy on project financing with regards to the African content. So over to our colleague from ECA to respond before we wrap up the session.
Thank you very much, honorable ministers, ladies and gentlemen. I will start with the intervention from Honorable Minister Stella Ndabeni from South Africa. Yes, integrated planning is key. It's very important. We have seen cases here in Africa where railways have been developed, but they are not really operational, they are not efficient. It has been very difficult to exploit this railway development furthest. I will cite two examples. The recently commissioned train from Mombasa to Nairobi, which is currently being extended to Uganda and beyond, is not operating optimally. The design speed of this railway is 250 kilometers, but now the railway is just traveling at 80 kilometers per hour. The reason is, the railway was designed, it was constructed, this is now operational, but there isn't enough power, energy supply, there isn't enough electricity to power the railway as it was designed. You see? The same scenario is happening with, again, another recently completed railway joining Djibouti and Addis Ababa. The design speed is again 250 kilometers per hour, but again, the train can only move gradually, slowly, at 80 kilometers per hour. The reason, not enough electricity. So while we plan for railway development, this has to be done in an integrated way. You plan railway construction, delivery, but at the same time, you also need to plan for energy generation, because these railways, they need to be powered, you see? And again, the trade and industries need to come into place. We need to make, the railway route a productive and economic zone. Otherwise, we might end up investing heavily in railway development, and this becomes a white elephant. We want railways that are productive, railways that are traversing productive centers across member states. Digital technology role. You see, Africa, we are soon, by 2030, 50% of Africans will be living in cities. So smart cities becomes not a luxury, but a necessity, you see? And this necessity will dictate smart technology, digital technology. Digital economy is the way for us. If you don't take up digital economy, if you don't make digital economy as a contributor to your national GDP, my friend, you are left out. There was a question again from Minister Stella Ndabeni on state guarantees. With the rail protocol, the moment the rail protocol is signed and ratified by member state, no more guarantee is required, because you have just created a framework, a legal framework, that will be protecting the interest of the private operator, the lessee, and on one hand, and the interest of the raiser, the manufacturer, or the owner of the rolling stock on the other hand. So no more state guarantee. There was another set of beautiful questions from Lesotho, the SADC position on high-speed trains. Well, I'm not really very sure about the SADC position, but we have an AU, African Union position. At the moment, the high-speed railway development master plan that I shared with you, with about 6 lateral routes from west to east, and about 4 longitudinal roads from south to north, the design speed for passenger train will be 250 kilometers per hour to start with. And because passengers need to be delivered and moved from one point to another much faster than goods, the design speed for good trains, good wagons, will be 100 kilometers per hour. This is the beginning. Of course, this will be improved upon as we go along, with time and as our economies improve. Now, the issue of gender parity. What I can say is that whatever we do, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is social service delivery, there has to be gender parity. Now, with infrastructure development, and especially for railway development, we need to involve women in whatever we do, whether it is planning, whether it is budgeting, and why not? Even during construction. Our mothers, our sisters can also, procure and deliver construction materials. And some of them could be railway managers, they could be good CEOs, just like they happen to be our CEOs at home. So that is so much I can say. Thank you, Ms. Taylor, for your intervention. You see, the African economies can only be transformed if we change the way we do things. Economically, we need to add value to our primary commodities, which are very vulnerable in the global market, with the prices fluctuating and most of the time going low. But semi-finished or finished products, value-added product, in most cases, we agree with me that the prices at the global level, at the regional level, they are more stable. So there is no way Africa can grow the economy sustainably and inclusively if we don't industrialize. But again, what comes first, industrialization or infrastructure development? I would say infrastructure development, particularly maritime, railway, and air transport for perishable goods is key. Because otherwise, how do you freight your finished product, your industrial product? How do you market them? Because the essence of industrialization is that all the basics for intra and international trade, they need to be in place. So railway development and industrialization are very important and they go together. There was a question from Mozambique. Why are we vying for cities-to-cities routes in railway development? You see, the railway routes of the future in Africa follow the existing highway corridors in Africa. And you will find that these corridors pass from one country to another, they pass from one capital to another. But again, in the context of African integration, in the context of the operationalization of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we need to have capital connected with one another by railways, by highway, and by air transport.
Yes, can you conclude, Suteri? Then we wrap up.
Yes, let me come to the last question. Why is Africa doing more business with Asia than within herself? You see, a container of gold from China to Durban or to Mombasa and Dar es Salaam for that matter, it costs through freightage and CIF, it's about $1,000. But if you freight the same container from Dar es Salaam to Goma in DRC, or the same container from Durban to Harare, it is likely to cost not less than $3,000. Why? Because the intra-Africa, inter-regional infrastructure development hasn't happened. So that is again our challenge. We need to pull up our sources and deliver all the necessary transport infrastructure assets as well as services within and among African member states. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for good question and the responses. And because we are going to prepare in Parliament we call the answered. Other questions, we will get them through the papers. According to our program, we are supposed to have finished the second session and then take our tea. I have spoke to my colleague that now we finish the first session and then we go for the tea, and after we took our tea, then we shall come to finalize the remaining two sessions. They are telling me I needed to ask participants, shall we continue to finish the second session, or shall we stop with the first one and then we go for the tea? When we come, we finish the remaining two, or we finish as programmed, the first and second, thereafter we go for the tea. I need your comment, please. Silence means, sorry? So the chair first statement should be taken. We go for the tea. And then we finish, we come to finish the remaining session. Okay.
Yes, so can we give a round of applause to our Honorable Minister and all the presenters? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Session Chair. Thank you very much, our Chief Guest and Chair for the SADC Ministers. Now, Honorable Guest of Honor and Session Chair, before we go for the harmonizing tea, we have some few announcements here. But let me concur with the Session Chair that this first session was quite exciting. The Guest of Honor's keynote actually inspired all of us. The chair was so exceptional. The presenters presented it excellently. Can we join our hands again and give them hard claps, please? Now, since it has been decided that other sessions will fall after the harmonized tea, then allow us to give this following management of the harmonized tea. Honorable Ministers, Permanent Secretaries, Director General and other Chief Executives will have their harmonizing tea second floor. And the rest of the delegates will go to Kilimanjaro for breakfast, that is third floor, which we used to have yesterday, on Monday, since just to yesterday. And I would request all other delegates should go to the third floor. And may I request the liaison officers to kindly guide the ministers, permanent secretaries, and director generals to the second floor, and the rest of us, let's proceed on to the third floor. Honorable Guest of Honor, Honorable Session Chair, I thank you very much for manning this first session very well. Thank you very much for your kind attention. We'll be back here after half an hour. Thank you.